So a long time ago on my channel, I had a series where I took Marvel characters and discussed what it would be like if they were in My Hero Academia instead, right? So if you want to go check that out, I'll leave a link to the playlist in the comments. But with things ramping back up in the MCU, it got me thinking about how the new Phase 4 batch of characters would work, considering how much has changed in My Hero Academia since the last time I made one of these, and I really wanted to focus on one character in particular instead of doing 5 like I did for all the other videos. So I think from now on, we're going to do just one character and really deep dive on them. But if you guys want to see me return to doing 5 characters per video, please let me know in the comment section below. But we're going to get right into talking about Moon Knight after that intro. Hit it! Now, so far in the series, we've covered everyone from Peter Parker's Spider-Man to Nightcrawler, Mysterio, and beyond. But we haven't really given much attention to characters that often deal with a more mystical side of things. So I, of course, needed to talk about Moon Knight and how he would fit in the world of My Hero Academia. Marc Spector was a man of a very troubled youth. When Marc was 4 on a day trip with his father, Marc chased a small bird that caught his attention, quickly getting out of his father's sight. When he went back to return to his father and show him the odd bird which sat in the palm of his hands, he found his father laying on the sidewalk, lifeless in a pool of blood, the victim of what seemed to be a random attack. Alone, terrified, and not understanding what to do, Marc began to panic until another boy appeared nearby, seeing the situation and offering to help Marc. The boy, Steven, was somehow able to calm Marc down, and then when he did, the bird that lingered around Marc flew in small circles and then began to tug at Marc's hair before flying off in a direction, wanting to be followed. The two followed the bird to Marc's home before it had flown off to wherever it had come from. Once reaching his door, Marc turned to say thank you to the boy who helped him get this far, but he too was gone, leaving Marc to return to his mother alone with the responsibility of telling her what happened. After this day, Marc began to see things that he couldn't quite explain at times, and at other times, he felt like he would miss small moments. It started with maybe missing a question that someone asked him, but being told that he already answered it, or finding himself in his room after only remembering being screamed at by his mother, but finding new bruises on his arms. Some nights, Marc thought he could see the shadow of a bird nested on the branch of a tree outside of his window, stretching and spreading across the wall. And on those nights, he'd always dream of an item in a location that he didn't know. Partly due to his unpleasant life, Marc was unlike his peers who had dreams of becoming a hero. He simply wanted to see the world and experience the world's wonders outside of Japan. He grew up watching movies where explorers would travel the world in search of some lost artifact or a tomb that hosted a mysterious treasure, but the reality of any of that being in his future was very small. His family didn't have much. They got by on their faith and hard work, but their finances were a constant worry for the family of 2, often relying on the local synagogue for assistance, which was graciously offered by way of food and even shelter when it was needed. As years went on, his mother developed an illness, but it didn't quell her rage towards Marc at all. All these years, she somehow blamed him for what happened to his father, and never let him forget it. Marc would hear a voice in his head that said, "Be tough," when things got too bad, and that got him through the worst of it. However, despite what he faced at home with his mother, Marc was still shattered when his mother passed due to her illness when Marc was only 10. Soon after, members of the Public Hero Safety Commission had come for Marc. Dressed in all white, they made their case that Marc was very special and could be a benefit to the community if trained correctly, because he could see things that the average person could not. Upon speaking with a man in a white suit with a bird skull pin on his collar, Marc's guardians eventually relented and placed them in the care of the Public Safety Commission, who explained to Marc that he did in fact have a quirk and put him in the care of the man with the bird pin that seemed to know more about Marc than himself. It was never explained to Marc how they knew all sorts of things about him, but over the years, he grew to trust the food that filled his stomach or the clothes that kept him warm. So along with his many peers in the public safety training program, he was happy to continue training and learning from these kinds of people, until he grew older and older and rose in the ranks to become one of their best agents. Marc's quirk, which had been trained and developed by this time, was called Eyes of the Moon, and it gave him the ability to see things hidden from everyone everyone else, but the ability relied on the moon's presence in order to work. Since this quirk doesn't boast any physical attributes, Marc really had to learn, much like Aizawa did in My Hero Academia, how to hone his body and his skills and really learn specifically how to fight against quirk users. But usually Marc would rely on his teammates and comrades because they were considerably capable. But there were times where even Marc himself was not very reliable or useful because his ability relies on the moon's presence in order to work. Without the moon, he was pretty much quirkless. The Public Safety Commission made Marc the commander of a division of quirk users with similarly odd abilities who would take on more paranormal threats that society couldn't know about. This top secret operation continued on until Marc was an adult. But given Marc's many successes, he was given certain benefits from the commission, who was government funded. He was allowed to live wherever he wanted within Japan and took frequent extended trips overseas. Now sometimes the commission would lose contact with Marc, but the man with the bird pin would always bring him back over his shoulder, ready for the next mission with no memory of where he was by the time that he'd woken up. Now together with the other members of a team, these two were sent on a mission to take out a quirk user in Egypt who had the ability to speak with the dead, and was amassing a large following that the Safety Commission found dangerous. After all governments everywhere have secrets that only lie in the mouths of dead men, locked away forever, unless a quirk like this is allowed to exist. So this operation or operations like this were crucial not just for Japan, but several other world governments who take in a keen interest themselves, but often fail to capture or destroy the quirk's user. Marc was eventually separated from his unit and met this quirk user, who in a last-ditch effort to distract Marc, calls upon the soul of his late father and allows Marc to speak with him. Marc questions his father. Why? How did you die? What happened? But his father's vestige stares back at him, pointing with a face full of rage, and screams, "It was you! 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 You!" over and over, as Marc begins to hear voices in his own mind echoing, "Be tough. Calm down. It was my fault. Be tough. He's wrong. It was my fault." He falls to the ground and looks to his father and says, "Even you, father?" But upon looking up, he realizes his father's eyes haven't moved from their position. He's still pointing, now past Marc. Marc activates his quirk and turns his head, only to see the man with the bird skull pin as he enters the room. The father's voice continues, "You! It was you!" And slowly realizing what these words mean, that his entire life has been a lie, that it was all because of this man, Marc snaps, running towards the man and blacking out entirely. He wakes up covered in blood, outside on the sands of Egypt, with the man of the bird skull pin looking right into his eyes, with a pained, confused expression on his face. Blood drips from his mouth onto Marc's face as Marc looks down and sees a giant wound in the man's chest and blood all over him, while Marc is gripping onto something that he can't see, which is lodged into the man's abdomen. The man smiles and says, "Perfect. Now it's your turn." And Marc, seeing this as a threat, jams the invisible item further into the man's chest and pushes him off of him, but finds that he himself can't get up. In fact, he can barely move. He tries to drag his body, but starts to feel the strength leave it. His vision starts to fade, with even the moonlight unable to make its way through to his eyes. In the darkness, Marc activates his quirk one last time instinctually, so he doesn't die without knowing what treasure he finally found in an ancient tomb of his own. And all he can see is a crescent-shaped golden moon, now glowing vibrantly in his hands, seemingly charged by the light of the moon or the blood that no longer seems to be covering the item. Marc begins to pray, knowing these are his final moments with the crescent in his hand, but never in all of his prayers has he heard a response. This time, however, a voice responds from the darkness, offering a deal. "Marc Spector, work for me, and you can live. Together, we can turn fantasy into reality." Turning to the source of the voice, Marc sees a large figure of a bird skull covered in wraps being outlined by the shape of the moon. And moments before passing out, he accepts the being's deal, becoming more than a man, becoming the Moon Knight. So with his backstory out of the way, just how would this Moon Knight work in the world of My Hero Academia, with it introducing gods and more paranormal aspects into the world? Well, first, I think immediately following this, Marc, given the hero name Moon Knight by the Public Safety Commission, would be labeled a villain by that exact same commission. They don't like the idea of their secrets getting out, and anyone that doesn't follow protocol is quick to be labeled a villain, very much like how Lady Nagant was. I think Marc would have to start going under other names and would eventually begin developing his life outside of who he was in Japan, but eventually his personalities would resurface and kind of take the wheel for extended periods of time, fully developing the personalities of Jake and Steve, who are the be tough and stay calm voices respectively. The Safety Commission would use any information they have on Marc that they've kept secret against him, and they'd label him crazy and dangerous, and he'd be hunted down by heroes constantly as he fought for the side of humanity against unseen threats that only further the thought of him being insane. I think eventually, in search of answers about the man who killed his father and the organization that took him, Marc would return to Japan to infiltrate the Public Safety Hero Commission, but would constantly run into interruptions when the god in his head, Khonshu, appears and keeps him busy instead of allowing Marc to find out about the dark secret that he can't allow Marc to know. That it was him who sent the man who took out Marc's father and led to all of these events in the first place. Also, he could get Marc and his broken mind along with his ability under his command. With Khonshu's assistance, Marc's quirk, which before only allowed him to see the unseen powered by the moonlight, awakened into a quirk that overall enhances Marc relative to the state of the moon. On new moons, he was the weakest and again, effectively quirkless, but on a full moon, he'd even be able to tussle with some of Japan's highest ranked heroes, which often he would find himself having to do to continue his pursuit of the truth while in Khonshu's service. Now, there's a few characters that I think this version of Moon Knight would be very, very cool to interact with, but honestly, the one that I want to focus on for this video would be Deku. So for instance, I could see Moon Knight fighting a large, fiery, mythical owl and causing all sorts of destruction, only for Dark Deku to show up during the time where he left UA and question what such a notorious villain was doing destroying some random home in the midst of Japan's largest series of prison breaks ever. The invisible owl beast would momentarily fly away to get away from Moon Knight, who has been hunting it for a while, and I feel like the Deku at this point of the story would try using Black Whip immediately to capture Moon Knight, or he would try to blitz him and put him out of commission. However, on this night, the moon is full, and Moon Knight is surprisingly able to cut Deku's Black Whip to keep it away from him using his crescent blades, and he's also able to dodge throughout the room as Deku tries unsuccessfully to capture him. Moon Knight sends a kick so fierce that Deku feels some of the wind whoosh past him as he dodges it, and then getting serious, he swoops in with a focused Detroit smash that sends Moon Knight flying out of the building. As Deku rushes expecting to run and catch Moon Knight before he hits the ground, he sees that Moon Knight is actually floating, impaled in the air, with large blood-soaked translucent talons holding him up that have pierced through his body. At this moment, Deku's danger sense begins to activate again, and he can't quite see it, but he feels the outline of something dangerous around Marc, who gets thrown down to the ground. Deku rushes to Marc's side to try and help him however he can. Marc's eyes open with his quirk active, and he sees Deku kneeled over him with several shadowy figures faintly floating behind him with piercing eyes of starlight. Moments later, Deku's danger sense goes insane, way worse than it has ever affected him before, and he jumps backwards at full speed instinctually, watching Moon Knight from a distance as a shadowy figure walks up to him and points what seems like a staff cloaked in darkness at the man laying on the ground. This causes Marc to rise from the ground of his wound slowly healing and death overcome once again. A voice enters Deku's mind and says, "I am in need of your assistance." And Deku, thinking that this is Moon Knight himself, begins to ask him what's going on. The two work together to take down the large bird beast, with Deku using his danger sense and communicating with Moon Knight to help get the job done. But that isn't enough for Deku. There's still questions here that are left unanswered. At the end of the day, Moon Knight is still a wanted criminal, and Deku now more than ever needs answers about what he just saw. He confronts Marc and tells him that he still needs to come with Deku, but as Marc turns to leave, Deku's vision starts to blur as he feels a cold skeletal finger press against his forehead. Immediately, Deku is forced into the Vestige realm, where he and each of the Vestiges sees a new chair and a new figure sitting in it. A being in an all-white suit with a shadowy, giant bird skull for a head tells Deku that he has as many questions for Deku and the other Vestiges as Deku has for Marc. What is this? This isn't the same as his agreement with Marc, but he's curious, interested. Evading every question sent his way, the man leaves the Vestige world, only saying that if the opportunity arises, he'll return and answer all of Deku's questions when the time is right. All Deku needs to do is follow the phases of the moon to find him. And then, just as quick as he arrived, the man vanishes, leaving Deku now awake alone in the streets with Moon Knight nowhere to be found. So what do you think? Could Moon Knight work in the world of My Hero Academia, or is the world of gods and monsters too far removed from a story like this? Traditionally, I like to say a lot of Moon Knight's comics actually end up with him dealing with a lot of street level threats, and the mystical stuff kind of gets mixed in different runs, so there are other ways to make it fit, but I wanted to model this Moon Knight a little more closely to the Disney Plus Moon Knight, because that is the one that I'm a little more familiar with. But yeah, I think there's definitely ways where we can make him fit, and regardless, this sort of video is kind of just for fun and more of a writing exercise than anything too serious, so as long as you all enjoyed it, that's enough for me. Check back next time maybe for a proper Marvel Hero Academia video with multiple characters and backstories. I just sort of wanted to go off about Moon Knight because that was my favorite Marvel show recently, and I feel like he needed his own video rather than just being part of another one. So thanks for indulging me, and like I said, if you want that video featuring Shang-Chi, Loki, Wanda, and more, please let me know by liking this video and getting it to 600 likes. I've got a lot of new viewers on the channel lately, and my analytics tell me that if you all subscribed, we'd get the channel to 300,000 subscribers in no time, so please think of subscribing or at least bookmarking my channel so you can come back and watch more. But that's it for me, everybody. This has been Vocal Pineapple with Marvel Hero Academia Moon Knight Edition, and I'll see you later. Love you guys. Peace.